Welcome back, everyone. We're about to get started on our last topic you need before the midterm, 19th century ideologies. And what is this about? Well, during the same time as the Industrial Revolution and the Progressive years, there are several new ideas or isms or ideologies that develop in the 1800s, which I also want you to know about. There's going to be quite a few. There are five we're going to talk about today. I'll just pop them up each one as we go through each slide. But it's conservatism, liberalism, socialism, romanticism, and nationalism. Don't worry if you didn't get them all down; you'll get them down as we go through it. So these are very important isms. You know, there are others as well. Sometimes you can say, what about like Marxism and communism and all of those? Those are 19th century ideologies as well. We're not going to talk about those today. I'm going to kind of explain Marxism and all of that a little bit later on when we get to the Bolshevik Revolution and things. But for us, we're kind of looking at these new ideologies of the 19th century. Some of them we still have today, and they don't always mean the same thing today as they did back then, too. So that's something I'll kind of touch upon as well a bit. So let's just start going through them here. Again, there's like five big ones you're going to need to know. So obviously, when I say there are five, you need to know they're all five. And we'll start with this first one, conservatism. And so here's some key words you're going to need to know, some of the people involved, and what it's all about. So conservatism, 19th century conservatism, is really started. There isn't one guy, but I'm going to put this man named Edmund Burke up for you. Edmund Burke wrote this essay or book called The Reflection on the Revolution in France. And in this book, Reflection on the Revolution in France, he basically writes this really right in the beginning of the 19th century, end of the 18th century, like let's just say 1800, round number, right? So right around the year 1800 AD, he's just observed the French Revolution, and he says the French Revolution is a bloody mess. That's not Edmund Burke, by the way, here, this picture. It's this next guy I'll talk about in a second. So Edmund Burke, you know, he writes this book, and he says basically the French Revolution was a bloody mess, bad. And he says revolutions are bad. He said if you want to make changes in society, you should do them gradually. You shouldn't have upheavals in society. Remember, part of the French Revolution was Robespierre and closing down the churches, and he said that's bad. You know, churches shouldn't be shut down. He talks about, you know, just the need of stability in a society, and that's essentially what 19th century conservatism was a lot about, right? It's much more complex than that. I'm just going to give you basics on it. And so he writes this book, and some people read it and go, oh, all right, pretty interesting. And one guy was very influenced by this idea of conservatism politically, was this man named Count Clemens von Metternich, a long funny name, and here he is. He's from Austria, so there's a picture of him right here that I put on the slide. And Count Clemens von Metternich, who was from Austria, he decided that this conservatism philosophy is a good thing for Europe. So in 1815, he organizes this big meeting in Vienna, right? Sometimes called the Congress of Vienna. And in this Congress of Vienna, he outlines what is known as the Concert of Europe. And again, this was in 1815, right? So right after Napoleon, right as Waterloo is all over and everything, right? So in 1815, Concert of Europe through what is called the Congress of Vienna. So in this Congress of Vienna, what they basically outline is this idea of a concert of Europe. What does that mean? Well, think of a concert, all a bunch of different people playing musical instruments together in harmony. And he says that this is what Europe should be doing in this time period. Now, I want you to think about this. I asked you before once to think of all the wars in the 20th century, and you know, we thought of a lot. There are a lot of wars in the 20th century. If you just off the top of your head have to think of wars in Europe in the 19th century, after Napoleon, before World War I, how many wars can you just list off the top of your head? And my guess is if you start thinking, you go, I can't think of many right off the top of my head for most people. Were there wars? Yes, there were. We'll talk about some. Franco-Prussian War, Austro-Prussian War, there are other conflicts in Europe. But overall, compared to the Napoleonic period or compared to the 20th century with World War I, World War II stuff, the 19th century was relatively stable in Europe. And again, this is important. Why is this important? Because this is what helped allow the Industrial Revolution to flourish, and what brings about stability in Europe. Again, it wasn't perfect, this concert of Europe, but at least there were people like Clemens von Metternich, again, influenced by this kind of 19th century conservative idea to bring more stability, less revolutionary elements, more kind of evolutionary elements in a society. So anyways, that's a pretty important ideology in the 19th century. Okay, next one is 19th century liberalism. And the key person here is a man named John Stuart Mill, who writes a book called On Liberty. And I'm going to just read to you one sentence from his work, because I think this one sentence really captures what his book is all about. And he writes this in 1859, right? So On Liberty, John Stuart Mill, 1859 is when it was written. And so let me just kind of read this to you. He says the following: the only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others. I'll say it again. The only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others. So that's 19th century liberalism, which essentially sounds a lot like laissez-faire. This is one of the things that these terms don't mean the same. If you think of somebody who is of the left, what we'd call a more liberal left today, they believe more in big government, more controlling government, right? That's what liberal left means today. Conservatives usually want smaller government. 19th century liberalism is a lot closer. I don't know if you've ever heard of this political party, but I just had the Libertarian Party, right? So that Libertarian Party, if you've heard of them before, they kind of capture 19th century liberalism the best, which is very limited government, right? That there should be no censorship at all, that everyone should have a right to vote. That was part of 19th century liberalism. But more importantly, that kind of the needs of the individual are more important than the needs of the state. And that the only time the state even passes a law is if person A is going to hurt person B, the state says, don't do that. Otherwise, stay out of people's affairs. So that's 19th century liberalism in a nutshell, right? So John Stuart Mill, know his name, know the book. Again, 1859 is when he wrote it. And so that's the story of John Stuart Mill, okay? Next one is socialism, and we'll spend a little time on this. I used to not spend a lot of time on this, but obviously, as the years have gone by, this is an idea that people have heard of a lot more, and I think it's important people understand the elements of socialism. A lot of individuals involved with it. I put one name, a man named Henri de Saint-Simon from France. Nothing specific he wrote, but I do want you to understand what is socialism. So let me kind of, this is always a good class discussion, but I could still kind of lay it out for you guys, a few key elements of it. So one of the things about socialism, economically, there's this idea that you redistribute wealth, that if you have really, really, really wealthy people up here and really poor people down here, you take the wealth from the rich people and you give it to the poor people, and then they move up, they move down, and everyone's in the middle, right? That's the theory of socialism. And, therefore, in the socialistic system, sometimes you use what is called a graduated income tax. I'm not sure if you understand what that means. But let's say you have 100 people in a society, and person 100 makes $100 a year, and person 1 makes $1 a year. If everyone pays 10%, right, this person pays $10, and this person pays 1 cent, right? That's if everyone pays 10%. That's a flat tax. And a graduated system that you see under socialism is that this person would pay 90% of their taxes, and this person pays 0% of what they come in. So they pay $90, this person pays 0. Then what happens? Then all that money goes to the government, and then the government redistributes it, and everybody is taken care of. Everybody has a roof, everybody has food, everybody has everything they need. Well, it's one of these ideas that sometimes sounds good in theory. It's like, great, sounds great. But there's, of course, some human nature problems with socialism, which is, some people are more ambitious, some don't work as hard, some, don't, that's one of the key things. There's a great kind of a fable of a professor. And this professor, it's kind of a story that circulated quite often. I'm not sure if it actually even happened. It might be more of an urban legend, but the story is still makes sense. That the professor goes to his students and say, we're going to have a socialist classroom. And I'm going to have all the students take their exams, and then I'm going to average out each test. And that's the grade everybody gets. So the first test, the students take the test. Some make A, some make B, some make C, some make D, some make fails. So the average grade was like a B, right? Whatever, a C. So everybody gets a C, right? And the F student's like, great. And the A student's like, what the hell just happened? I worked really hard and all I got was a C. As the semester goes on, what happens is those A students stop working so hard and the average eventually goes down to a D. So that's part of the issues of socialism, right? It kind of oftentimes saps the desire to kind of move up. Now, are there degrees of socialism? And the answer to that is yes, right? You know, you could have some level of socialism in a society, but the question is how much can you have before you have, I heard this expression, too many people in the cart and not enough people pulling the cart. And once you get to the point where there are too many people sitting in the cart and not enough people pulling the cart, then you got a problem. So this is where you have this kind of socialism ideology that you know is growing, but I think at the end of the day, I think most people still kind of realize there's some inherent problems with a system like that. Some people say another part of socialism is who owns the means of production. In a free market system, it's the individuals. In a socialist system, it's the government. So you give the government owns the means of production. They own the factories. They own, the farms. They own all of that. And the individuals just kind of basically work at the end for the government. It really makes you very reliant on government as well, very dependent on government as well. One of the worst things anybody could be in life is dependent on somebody else, right? The moment you become that, you've got a problem, right? Because then what happens, there's an old saying, any government big enough to give you everything is big enough to take it away. And then what happens if the government takes it away and you rely on it? Then you've got a problem. And so these are things that you have to think about as people talk about socialism. Some people say, well, doesn't this sound like communism? Well, economically, the two are basically the same. What's the difference? That in socialism, this is people choose socialism. It's more freely chosen. And years ago, when I was taking classes, my professor put it the difference between socialism and communism. He said was communism is socialism forced upon you by the point of a gun. In other words, communism is often associated with some sort of dictatorial ruler like a Stalin, like a Castro, right? And so forth. Mao in China. In socialism, you could just kind of the people choose it. So it's an interesting idea. Some people go, well, it works in some countries. Well, yeah, it could work a little bit better if you're a nation of 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 million people only, as opposed to 350 million, and everybody works really hard, and everybody is from already at a high standpoint. It could work. But every country has its own dynamics that you have to consider as well. So there's a lot to it. I mean, this is again more of a good class discussion type of topic. But as long as you know some of the characteristics of socialism, I definitely want to think critically about some of the issues behind it economically and so forth. What are some of the human nature elements of it? And then the name is finally the Sun Simone. There are a lot of others. All right, so that's 19th century socialism. And again, is it an influential idea? Yes. Whether you like it or you hate it, it's an influential idea, right? There are people today who are very influenced by this idea. And by the way, there's also two kinds of people who like who push the socialism ideology. I often say there are the true believers, people who really believe socialism is good, that they think, this is going to help everybody. And then there are people who go, well, maybe I don't really believe it, but I can get a lot of people to vote for me if I promise them stuff. And that's part of socialism as well. The government's going to provide for you. And they know there is a problem with it, but still people go along with it. Again, are there elements of socialism? Yes, public education and, things, government building infrastructure and things like that. That is a bit of socialism, right? So I don't think you want to completely dismiss every single bit of it, but it is something that you have to worry about some of the key characteristics of it. Okay? All right, so let's move on to Romanticism. So this one's a lot of fun. Romanticism is a movement we mentioned last time. I'm going to give you more details here. We're going to have a couple slides on this. So Romanticism is about marrying who you want to marry, but Romanticism is also an artistic movement, a musical movement, and a literature movement. So you want to know all three. So let's start with the art. For the art, Romanticism, what are some characteristics? And then I'll show you a couple images. In Romanticism art, you see a lot of things of nature. You see a lot of movement in the art, a lot of emotion in the art, a lot of conflict, kind of the individual against a big, powerful force. You see that in the art. You also see kind of less famous people, right? In Romanticism art, it might just be average Joe. Like there's one here called Two Men Looking at the Moon. Another one's called Raft of Medusa, and I'll show you these images in a second. But that's kind of some of the characteristics. So nature, individuals, movement, emotion, feelings, those are all characteristics you would want to know about Romanticism art. And these are two good examples you could jot down, and I'll show you the pictures in a second. Music, this is a really good example. I don't know, if you have a few minutes, go just Google Beethoven and Mozart and listen to the difference. Mozart was earlier, right? Mozart is in the 1700s, and Mozart's music, if you listen to it, is calming, it's smooth, it's quiet, and Beethoven is boom, 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 right? It's really in your face, it's loud. If you remember that Napoleon video that I asked you guys to watch, that documentary, in that beginning part of it, that's all Beethoven. If you want to listen to it again, it's big, it's strong, it's powerful, and that's the difference. It's much more energetic. So the art is different and the music is different. That's Romanticism. So I want you to know these things. If you just say Romanticism had new art and new music, that's not enough. You want to explain how the art and the music and the literature are different. I'll get to the literature in a second. Let me just show you a couple images. So this is Romanticism art. Just two men contemplating the moon, right? That's all it is. Just, again, not much symmetry in the art either. That's another characteristic. You see they're outdoor in nature in this image, and there's just two average men contemplating the moon. And then this one is called the Raft of the Medusa. And this is actually based on a real shipwreck. And if you look at the image, look at the ferocity, Mother Nature being very fierce, the outdoors, you see the expressions on their faces, the torn bodies there, very intense. And so that's kind of the Raft of the Medusa image. That's an example of art. Okay. And literature. So literature is part of Romanticism as well. I put a few names, one man named Wordsworth, a man named Keats, a woman named Mary Shelley, who wrote a little book called Frankenstein, and a man named Heinrich Heine. So these are all in the 1800s. You don't need specific dates, but let me just know a few of their names. And then the characteristics, right? What are the characteristics of literature? How is Romanticism literature different? Similar to the art. It's very emotional. It's very dynamic. It involves, again, the individual struggling against something bigger than them. Nature, again, is often in the art. Another characteristic is there are a lot of allusions, not illusions, allusions with an A in the beginning in Romanticism literature. And for those of you who don't know what that is, that's when you're writing something and you have some reference to some historical event. You see that in there as well. So there's a lot of Romanticism literature in the 18th century, in the 1800s, 19th century. And those are just a few names: Wordsworth, Keats, Shelley, Frankenstein. And then this man named Heinrich Heine, who I've always really thought his poetry was amazing. And he has one poem that I want you to listen to. It's a poem called Lorelei. So let me go to our next scene here. All right, so here's Lorelei, this poem. And I want you to listen to the words in this poem carefully. And as you listen to these words, I want you to see if you can capture all the characteristics of Romanticism literature. All right, so kind of listen to it. It goes as following. I do not know what haunts me, what sat in my mind all day. An age-old tale confounds me, a spell I cannot allay. The air is cool, and in twilight the Rhine's dark waters flow. The peak of mountains and highlight reflect the evening's glow. There sits a lovely maiden above so wondrous fair. With shining jewels laden, she combs her golden hair. It falls through her comb in a shower, and over the valley rings a song of mysterious power that lovely maiden sings. The boatman in his small skiff is seized by turbulent love. No longer he marks where the cliff is, but looks to the mountains above. I think the waves must fling him against the reefs nearby, and that did with her singing the lovely Lorelei. So, you hear that poem and, you see nature, you see the Rhine's dark water, the peak of mountains in highlight, and what happens at the end, the guy is smashed into the cliffs there and he dies, right? One of the things about Romanticism, it isn't always happy endings all the time, right? It's very tragic a lot of times. And so you see that in a lot of Romanticism writing as well. And then the reference, I don't know if you caught the allusion, the singing, the sirens from the Odyssey, from Homer's Odyssey. That's what Heinrich Heine was using as influence to write this poem. So anyways, the poem's called Lorelei. I know it looks like a funny spelling, but that is how he actually spelled his poem. All right, so there you go. That's 19th century Romanticism. So know the art, know the literature, know the music, right? All right, and the characteristics and a few names. Let's go on to our last one. And this one is 19th century nationalism. And I don't usually do this, but you just get a simple definition. And you want to know this definition as it's written there: the state of mind rising out of an awareness of being part of a community that has common language, culture, traditions, and customs, right? So write it down. You want to write it down verbatim, right? And you'll want to know it verbatim. And in this point, it's not too important right now. This is going to be one of those very important ideas that comes back after the midterm. The material that you get after the midterm is, your next quiz and your finals and all that. It only covers parts from the second half of the semester. It's not going to cover everything from the entire semester. But there are a couple of ideas that are before the midterm that you will need to know, and this is one of them. Why is nationalism so important? Well, look at this definition of it, right? And if you know what's going on in Europe in the 19th century, nationalism is important because of what it's going to help bring about. There is no Germany in the 19th century. There's no Italy in the 19th century. What nationalism says is all these independent German people should become Germany. All these independent Italian people should become Italian. There is another view of nationalism for the Jewish people. It's called Zionism, right? Zionism is the idea that the Jewish people, who are scattered and persecuted everywhere, need a homeland to be united. So a lot of people kind of today have this disparaging view of the word nationalism, but there's nothing really negative about this definition of nationalism. There's other definitions as well, but nationalism is just the idea of being, part of a community that has common language, culture, traditions, and customs. What's wrong with that? If you don't have nationalism within a nation, you got a problem. You're going to have conflict. You're going to have civil war. So there's nothing wrong per se with this definition of nationalism, and there's nothing wrong with people wanting to be bonded together in a united civilization that shares these things. Where it does become a problem, because I always like to give, again, different perspectives, is what happens if you want to create a Germany and there are people who say we want to be part of this Germany and we don't. Then there could be a potential war. What happens if you say, well, we're not satisfied with just Germany, we want our nationalism to dominate everybody and you must be like us? Well, that's a problem, right? And that's going to get us into things like World War I and World War II. So nationalism, like many other things, it's not necessarily good or bad, it's how it's used, right? It's the whole thing with a lot of these ideas. It's sort of like religion, not good or bad, it's how it's used, right? There's a lot of good things, bad things, how it's interpreted. And I think it's true with nationalism as well. It's how one chooses to interpret it that gives it its positive or its negative possibilities. But this definition is what I want you to know, because this is kind of the dictionary definition of nationalism that will have great implications after the midterm. So we'll come back to it. All right, so that gives you a few of those isms. I hope they're all clear. And other than that, I think that covers everything you need before the midterm. And then after the midterm, we'll continue on with some other key events in the 19th century and eventually get into the 20th century. We'll get into World War I, World War II, a lot of big stuff still to cover. All right, thank you.